everyone, this is Pam, and today we're painting this beautiful little scene of the Sea of Galilee, and this is at sunrise, and I'm using a little reference photo here, and I've already done a little color study, and you can see this is just on a scrap piece of paper. I didn't make it fancy. I just used it to help mix up my colors in my palette and adjust some of the hues and intensities for the colors that I want to use. So I'm going to start with just throwing a little bit of water down. I'm going to work from top to bottom, and I'm going to throw a little water down on the top and start with my sky. I just want some random water droplets to try to catch some of the paint that I'm going to be putting down. And we'll start with a very light blue. I'm using the Inspiration palette from Daniel Smith, which has wisteria in it. It has lavender in it. It has green apatite genuine, and it has a rose of ultramarine, the moonglow, and the shadow violet. I won't be using all of those colors, and I'll try to tell you what I am using as we go along here. So I'm going to start with a little of the wisteria for the lightest part, the lightest wash in the sky. So I'll use quite a bit of water in my mix here, and you can see that the sky is pretty dramatic. So I want to make sure that I leave this streak of orange and yellow pretty white. I'm going to try to preserve that as I paint along. So let's just get some color down on our paper here. I'm using Arches 140 pounds cotton paper, cold press. And if you kind of just quickly swipe across, you can see that you get some texture that is just very beautiful in the sky. So I love the way that went down, and we're going to go with a little bit of the darker lavender that I have mixed with some of the rose of ultramarine, and come down here into these heavier clouds here. I can see that my horizon line is almost halfway down my page, so I have to pay attention to where I stop. Alright, and we're moving into some of the peachy orange color of this sunrise. So we'll lay in a streak of that that's getting pretty close to the horizon, and kind of right in the middle here is just a very beautiful outbreak of yellow mixed in with this orange. So let's pick up a little bit more color, mix a little more of that orange color, and for that I am using wisteria and some of the lavender mixed with yellow that will give me some of the more peachy tone here. But I want to try to preserve this bright yellow in just that one little area there. And I'm actually going to go in here. Let me pick up this. I don't want my paint to run too much toward the bottom here, so I'm going to flatten out my page a little bit. I'm going to pick up a little bit of a white streak here. I can go back in and add some white at the end of my painting, but if I can preserve the white of the paper, that's even better. Alright, and then next we come into some rather dark mountains. That is actually the Golan Heights in across on the eastern shore of the Sea of Galilee. And we want to get a good representation of the Golan Heights. So we're going to come in very dark right here and put a range of mountains in. I'm going to mix some of my lavender in there for variation in color. And I can go back in later after the horizon line dries a little bit and give a little shape to the top of those mountains. But for right now, I just wanted to get that color in, darken up the bottom of the mountain range there. I'm adjusting my incline on my paper as I go. I'm just adding some clouds to the sky as this paint is almost dry. I grab a little more of this lavender and mix it with cerulean blue. And get a little more drama in our sky here. I'm going to come up and just hit the tops of these mountains. Okay, so let's continue down, and you can see that I'm going to leave the part of the Sea of Galilee, the water itself. I'll leave that white for right now. We'll put some reflections and tint in it later on, but right now I want to go down and get the shape of the land mass and across the other side of the sea here. So I'm using green apatite genuine, and I'm going to hit that just with a little bit of olive, not too much because olive tends to get a little on the yellow side. I'm actually going to knock that back somewhat with some blue. It's actually lavender. Then I'm going to knock that back a little bit so it doesn't look so yellow. I'd like it to be a little darker and a little more on the blue side. So you can see by just adding that tiny bit, it has really changed the hue of those greens. So I like that a lot. And we'll just drop in a little more over here for color variation. And I have a row of hedges in the foreground here that I'm going to go ahead and block in. And I'll go in and use my shadow violet along with the green to darken that even a little more for the bottom of this hedgerow. Just adjusting the shape of my shoreline right here. We're still waiting for that sky area to dry a little bit so we can put some final touches on that. And in the meantime, I'm going to pick up a little more of this peach and knock it back to a very light sandy color. Add some yellow, and picking up some cerulean blue out of my palette here. I just want to put a little bit of this ground in between these hedgerows. I'm going to lift some color out so that I can put some grasses in that area. And coming over to the other side, we have some rather dark green. So we'll add just a little bit of the shadow violet to the green and start putting in, we have just a couple of little bushes on this side of the painting. And I want that actually still darker. So I'll pick up a little more of my green Apatite Genuine mixed with the shadow violet, which gives me a very dark green with a little bit of a violet cast to it that I really like. And get just the basic shape of our bushes in that area. Okay, and let's darken up the bottom of this hedgerow just a little bit. Okay. All right, so our sky area is dry enough now that we can go back up and work on it a little bit more. I'm going to pick up a little more of this Cerulean Blue. Okay, and I need to knock that back because that is very bright and I need it to be muted down. So I will use the Moonglow here because I want more of a purple cast to it. You see how that's just that beautiful purple color? In fact, I think I'm going to hit the bottom of this with just a true Moonglow. And then I'll pick up a little bit of the Cerulean and a little more of the Moonglow and come back and hit the tops of those mountains again, just deepening that as we go. And the key here is to have the wash, the first wash here, not completely dry, but we don't want it so wet that the pigment is running too much. Now here's the point where I want to start putting in some downward strokes to show that the hillside and foothills of these mountains are sweeping down. So the angle of our brush strokes will help that out. Okay. And we'll probably come back and hit the top one more time before we're finished with this. I want to, at this point, um, add some bright yellow. This is lemon yellow. And I'm just going to hit this dry part of the sun where the sun is actually coming up behind this mountain range. Lemon yellow will just pop, and that's what we want there. And we also want a little more of this peach shade to really highlight that. So I'm going to pick up a little bit of this opera rose that's down here in the corner, and that's really going to give us a brighter orange to highlight the sky around the sky is really glowing here. Just picking up excess moisture, and let's get a little more of that orange and just let it creep into the yellow here. Okay, we want to keep that pretty close to the horizon line. I'm going to go back into our sky area here and just deepen this cloud. And that, if you can see from the reference photo here, it's very streaky there, so I'll get that. Streakiness going there. Bring the orange up just a little here. I've preserved a little bit of white right next to the mountain and the sunrise and the sun itself. I want to make that pop, and if you make things around that really dark and preserve that light area, that's what really will make that pop when it dries. You'll see the difference here. Okay, now I want to take some just Naples yellow. It's not quite as bright as the lemon, and I'm going to really water that down. And I can see in my reference photo above this cloud bank, the sunlight is being reflected in that area, so I want to just pop some of that in there. Not all areas, just a few. Leave some of the white because that's what's going to give you your contrast. Okay. I want for this Sea of Galilee, the water itself, to maintain a glow. So I need to pull out some straight cerulean. And to do that, I'm going to just clean out a well here in my palette so that I don't muddy this color in any way. So let's pull out this beautiful Cerulean Blue, and I just want a very, very light wash of it. In fact, I will go in and just add some water. I'm doing this very carefully because this the bottom of my mountain is not completely dry, so I have to be careful not to touch any of that, or it will bleed together, and I don't want that. If I weren't so impatient, I would probably be very smart to I'll let that dry a little bit better, but for the sake of the video, I'm going to just go in and chance it. So you can see this is barely tinted blue for the sea here. And right over here, and I need to do this when it's wet, right over here, right beneath where our sun is and where this orange glow in the sky is, I'm going to just drop in a very faint glow of orange as a reflection in the water. Okay, and I want to just a touch of this straight cerulean, hasn't been mixed with any other colors, very close to the far shoreline as just a very faint shadow of this mountain range. And I'll let that blend into the water there. I'm tilting my board a little bit to let it flow diagonally down the painting. I want it to flow this way. And this is a very good place to stop and let things dry. Okay, we're back, and it is time to give a little definition to the tops of our mountains. So I've mixed up some darker bluish purple using my cerulean and the rose of ultramarine, and we're going to just go along the top of this mountain range and define some edges, define the edge. I'm going to get very close, but try to preserve a little bit of that white right between the sun and the mountain range. And I just took a little clear water on my brush. I'm going to soften that edge a little bit. I want to pull my stroke down because that's going to help define the texture and the landform here. In fact, I'm going to drop in a little purple to show some cliffs and valleys in this mountain range. Okay, using a lot of clear water just in areas so that we can soften those edges. Okay. And I'll come back in. Need to find a nice liner brush here and put in a little more of that rose of ultramarine to get it a little more red in there and redefine, not a straight line across, but we want to be able to see where the mountain edge meets the sea's edge here. And I want to get rid of this little, there we go, got a little bloom there, so we can always cover that up. Okay, and softening the edge again with just some clear water. And my paper's on a slight incline. I don't even think it's 20%. It's a very slight incline so that things will be running this way down, so that gravity is going to help out a lot here. I had mixed up, while we were waiting for the paper to dry, a little brighter orange. So I'm going to come right in here. Put a little more drama in that sky. A little more yellow, just peeking out from behind those clouds. Okay, now let's come down, and we have some green mixed up here on our palette. And I see a nice line where there's a little dip in this land form right here. So I'm going to use that to our advantage, just to put in a few little bushes and shrubs, greenery. Just a hint. A little bit darker. Just looking for where I can define some shapes. It's all very loose. So I'm going to knock that green way back with some blue. and add some of this peach to come in here and just give an indication of some little undergrowth here. Keeping it very neutral because we want our eye to be pulled to the mountain area, not really to the grassy area in the foreground. Okay, it's time for just a few final details, and we're almost finished with this painting. Let's go in and get some very dark green, darken it up with our blue, and just a little bit of this moonglow. Moonglow, cerulean, and green apatite genuine will give us a nice dark green. And I want to put in just a few little branches here in the foreground, just indications that these are bushes, little bushes, and a few small trees. Not too many, just a few indications. Now I'm going to come up here and use a little special tool that I have discovered which is a boxwood twig, and right here I'm going to lay in some very dark, very wet pigment, and I want to pull out some little tiny branches. So using my little twig, you can see that these are so fine, the little branches here. I'll just give you a little indication of some grasses at the edge of the water there. Go back in and just soften the bottom edge, and I may even pick up a little bit of that pigment. Okay, and let's do the same thing just in this little tiny area right here. Nothing is overdone, not too much of anything. Soften the bottom edge of that out and lift off some of the extra pigment. Okay. Let's go into some of our purple and just a few shadows here and there. Okay, we don't want to overwork anything, so stop every now and again and just look and see where you are. I think I would like to have a few more just very fine grasses right here. Let's get my twig out. And now sometimes when you scratch with this boxwood twig, you get some very nice lifting. So it has actually created some white branches here, which I really like. Let's see if we can do that again over here. Yeah, we get a little bit of these little white roots. Okay, that's looking nice. I like that. And I just want to stipple in some more very light peach. Very light color right here to indicate some grasses. So I am stippling and pulling up on my brush just slightly. I'm going to put a little tiny bit of that mauve color and hit the bottom. Okay, just add a little tiny pop of color right there to harmonize things. Okay, and just a little more of that mauve over on this side. And I think we're going to call that bottom part finished. Let's look back to our mountain and our sunrise. I would like to pop in just a little more of this lemon. Okay, take a wet brush. I'm going to turn this upside down because any paint that spreads out or bleeds out, I would want it to bleed out toward the sky and not into my mountain. So since I have a slight little incline here, I can help this along. Let that bleed out, blend it just a little bit. I'm going to take my paper towel and go in here and see if I can lift back to white. Yes, and that's going to give a little pop of that sunrise right next to the mountain, top of the mountain there, peeking out over the mountain. And I think that should do it for the sunrise part. Let's reflect a little bit of that yellow in the water. Now soften the edge on both sides. But in the reference photo, I'm seeing these white blooms on the shrubbery right over here. So I would like to stipple in just very lightly in a few places. The blooms will be darkest, closest to us. And I'm going to add in just a little tiny bit of this rose of ultramarine to get a little bit of pink into some of these blooms. Just a few. If you do this as if it were in groupings of blooms, it's better than trying to stipple these out kind of evenly. So we have a grouping here, a grouping here, a grouping here, a few down here. And if we vary things a little bit, it helps them to be believable as flowers. So over here there's just a few, and way over here just a few more, and that kind of ties everything together. Okay, so I think I'm going to stop right there. I really like how these white blooms kind of complement the light bouncing off of this hedgerow down at the bottom of our painting here, which part of this will be covered up by the frame, but you'll be able to see a little bit of it. So I'm very happy with the way that turned out. I feel like I need a little more color in the mountains. They look a little bit light to me. So I'm going to go back in and do a glaze on those mountains using a lot of purple, or it's actually lavender and cerulean together, which gives us kind of this mauve color that we've used on the mountains. So let's just go hit these mountains in areas. I know that I want to go back to the area right near the sunrise, because the darker that is right there, spattered just a little bit, the darker that is right there, the lighter the sun will appear. So I know that I wanted to darken that up a little bit. All right, and let's just kind of hit this, hit and miss. We're just darkening this whole area up with a glaze. A glaze is when you paint over top of pigment. Okay, so that's much, much, much better. You have to really watch your values. The mountains here are much darker than the sky. And so I had to adjust that value. And the value of the mountains and the value of the grass in the foreground are very close in value, but the foreground is a little bit darker. So I had to darken this mountain area up to show that. I also need to darken up the shoreline, because now that I brought this value closer to the value that I laid down at the shoreline, we need to adjust that as well. So I'll go to my liner brush and go back into a darker value of that mauve, and just hit that shoreline one more time. You want to kind of stagger things. You don't want a straight line across. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. Right. I'm going to turn this around again so that the flow comes this way, and just soften that edge again with some clear water. Okay, I think that's good. And I'm starting to fiddle, which is a good indication that it's time to stop painting. And let's put a frame around it and see how it's going to look if we were to frame this up. And there it is. Sea of Galilee at sunrise. Thanks for watching. I appreciate you hanging out with me. And you can find us on Facebook, you can find us on YouTube, and I also have a weekly podcast now that you can go to my Facebook page and there's a link to the podcast. Or you can look here, and I will put the links to both YouTube and the podcast down in the comments here. So thanks for being here. Grace and peace until next time, and keep painting.